January 14th, 1984. The phone rings in a sprawling mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean in La Jolla, California. The man who answers has built an empire from 15-cent hamburgers. His name appears on restaurants in every state and dozens of countries. But Ray Kroc is dying, and he knows it. The estate surrounding him cost millions. The views stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The furnishings speak of wealth accumulated over decades. Yet the mansion feels empty. His third wife lives elsewhere most of the time. His daughter from his first marriage rarely visits. The McDonald's executives who once sought his counsel now make decisions without consulting him. Ray Kroc had transformed American dining. He had created a system that would feed billions. He had accumulated a fortune that exceeded $500 million. And he had built a California estate that should have been a triumph, a place where success could be enjoyed, where legacy could be contemplated, where a life of extraordinary achievement could be celebrated. Instead, the mansion became something else entirely, a monument to choices made and prices paid, a beautiful prison where wealth could not purchase the things that mattered most, a stage for the final act of a man who had won everything except what he truly wanted. This is not a simple story of architectural grandeur or real estate excess. This is the story of what happens when ambition consumes everything in its path, when business success comes at the cost of personal connection, when the mansion you build becomes a reminder of everything you sacrifice to afford it. The estate in La Jolla still stands today, though few know its history. The association with McDonald's has faded. The tragic dimensions of what happened within those walls have been largely forgotten. But the story deserves telling because it reveals something fundamental about the American dream and the hidden costs of achieving it. If you find these explorations of how wealth, ambition, and architecture intersect meaningful, please subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. And if you have insights about Ray Kroc or this era of American business, I welcome your thoughts in the comments. Ray Kroc died in that La Jolla mansion on January 14th, 1984. He was 81 years old. The estate passed to others. The McDonald's empire continued without him, and the house that should have been a sanctuary became just another property in a market that measures everything in dollars and remembers almost nothing about the people who once lived inside. Before we can understand the mansion, we need to understand the man. And before we can understand the man, we need to understand just how unlikely his success actually was. The milkshake machine salesman who saw the future. Raymond Albert Kroc was born on October 5, 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, a respectable Chicago suburb that also produced Ernest Hemingway. There was nothing in his background that suggested he would one day revolutionize American food service. His father, Louis Kroc, was a telegraph operator for Western Union. His mother, Rose, was a homemaker who held the family together through economic uncertainty. The Krocs were neither wealthy nor poor. They occupied that vast American middle class where comfort was possible but never guaranteed, where one financial setback could mean disaster, where children understood early that success required work, persistence, and a measure of luck that not everyone received. Ray was the oldest of 3 children. He had a younger brother and sister. The family dynamics were typical of Czech immigrant families in early 20th century America. Hard work was valued above almost everything. Education mattered, but practical skills mattered more. And upward mobility was the measure of whether you had succeeded in the new country. Ray showed musical talent early. He learned piano and could play by ear. This skill would prove valuable during his 20s, but would never quite translate into the career he initially imagined. Music was something Ray loved. Business was something Ray needed. He dropped out of high school at 15. The decision was not unusual for his era or his class. Many boys left school to work, to contribute to family income, to start building the careers that would define their lives. Ray's parents accepted his decision, though his mother worried he was throwing away opportunities. The immediate reason for leaving school was the war. World War I was consuming Europe. America had entered the conflict in 1917. By 1918, young men across the country were volunteering or being drafted. Ray was too young to enlist legitimately, but he was old enough to lie about his age. He joined the Red Cross Ambulance Corps, claiming to be 17 when he was actually 15. The Corps accepted him and began training. Ray was assigned to drive ambulances in France, transporting wounded soldiers from battlefields to medical facilities. It was dangerous work that killed or traumatized thousands of young men. Ray never saw combat. The war ended in November 1918 before his unit shipped overseas. He returned to Oak Park without the military glory he had imagined, without the experience of battle, without even having left American soil. It was the first of many times Ray would pursue something with absolute conviction only to have circumstances deny him the outcome he expected. Back in Chicago, Ray faced the question that would haunt him for 3 decades. What now? He had no diploma. He had no specific skills beyond playing piano. He had ambition without direction, drive without focus. He needed to find something, anything, that would provide income and perhaps eventually success. The 1920s were boom years in America. The economy was growing rapidly. New industries were emerging. Fortunes were being made by people who recognized opportunities others missed. Ray watched this prosperity with frustration. He was working, but barely getting by. Others his age were succeeding spectacularly. What was he missing? Ray played piano in nightclubs and speakeasies. The work was steady during Prohibition when illegal drinking establishments needed entertainment to attract customers. Ray was good enough to hold jobs, not good enough to become a featured performer. He made decent money when he worked consistently, but musical jobs were unreliable. Clubs closed, owners stopped paying, musicians were expendable. He tried radio in the mid-1920s when commercial broadcasting was exploding across America. Ray played piano for local Chicago stations. The work was more respectable than speakeasies but paid less. Radio was still figuring out its business model. Musicians worked for exposure more than money. Ray supplemented his musical income by selling. He sold everything. Paper cups for a company that was pioneering disposable food service containers. Real estate in Florida during the mid-1920s boom when swampland was being marketed as tropical paradise. Anything that offered commission and the possibility of getting ahead. The Florida real estate venture was typical Ray. He saw an opportunity. Everyone said fortunes were being made. He invested time and what little money he had. Then the bubble collapsed spectacularly in 1926. The land Ray had been selling was worthless. The commissions stopped. Another dream died before delivering on its promise. Through all of this, Ray was building the skills that would eventually make him successful. He was learning to sell. More importantly, he was learning to persist after rejection, to keep making calls after hearing no 100 times, to believe in products even when customers did not, to maintain enthusiasm even when circumstances suggested enthusiasm was foolish. These were not pleasant years. Ray was approaching 30 with nothing to show for 15 years of work. He was still living in Chicago, still bouncing between jobs, still convinced that success was coming while watching it arrive for everyone except him. In 1922, Ray married Ethel Fleming. She was a young woman from a respectable family. Not wealthy, but stable, the kind of family that valued marriage, home, and the conventional markers of middle-class success. Ethel believed in Ray even when his track record suggested skepticism was more appropriate. They set up household in a modest apartment. Ray continued his various sales jobs. Ethel managed their home with the limited income Ray provided. It was not the life either had imagined, but it was sustainable, for a while. Their daughter Marilyn was born in 1924. Parenthood should have been transformative for Ray. It was not. Or rather, it transformed him in ways that created distance rather than connection. Ray loved his daughter in the abstract, but fatherhood required presence, attention, time. Ray was always working, always traveling, always chasing the next opportunity that would change everything. Ethel raised Marilyn, largely alone. Ray was there for important moments when his schedule permitted, but mostly he was absent, physically or mentally. His mind was always on business, on sales, on the success that continued to elude him. The 1930s brought the Great Depression. For millions of Americans, the Depression meant unemployment, poverty, sometimes starvation. For Ray, it meant another decade of grinding struggle. He was working, but making less. Customers had no money. Sales jobs paid less commission. Every month was a scramble to cover rent and put food on the table. Ray took a job selling paper cups for the Lily Tulip Cup Company. The work was unglamorous but steady. Restaurants and businesses needed paper cups even during the Depression. Ray became a regional salesman, traveling throughout the Midwest, calling on clients, demonstrating products, writing orders. He was good at it. Good enough to survive when many salesmen were being laid off. But good enough only meant survival, not prosperity. Ray was providing for his family, but barely. Ethel was making miracles with inadequate budgets. Marilyn was growing up in circumstances that were secure but far from comfortable. The years passed. The Depression ended. America entered World War II. Ray was too old to enlist, so he kept selling paper cups. He was in his late 30s now. The dreams of his 20s had faded. He had accepted that he would probably be a traveling salesman until retirement. Respectable work, modest income, nothing remarkable. Then in 1937, everything changed. Or began to change, though Ray could not know it yet. Ray met Earl Prince, who had invented a machine that could make multiple milkshakes simultaneously. The device was called a multi-mixer. It had 5 spindles instead of 1, allowing a single operator to make 5 shakes at once. For busy soda fountains and restaurants, this was revolutionary. Faster service meant more customers, which meant more profit. Prince needed distributors. Ray saw an opportunity, not the opportunity yet, but an opportunity. Better than paper cups, more potential for commissions. Ray negotiated distribution rights for the Midwest and became a multi-mixer salesman. The next 17 years were more of the same grinding work Ray had been doing since his 20s, traveling constantly, calling on restaurants and soda fountains, demonstrating the multi-mixer, writing orders, following up on installations. The work paid better than paper cups, but it was still just sales. Ray was in his 40s now, then his 50s. Ethel was aging alongside him, though they were aging separately rather than together. The marriage had settled into a pattern of polite distance. They shared a home when Ray was not traveling, which was rarely. They raised Marilyn, though mostly that meant Ethel raised her while Ray sent money. Ray's health was beginning to show the strain of decades of travel and stress. He was diagnosed with diabetes in the late 1940s. The condition would plague him for the rest of his life, requiring dietary restrictions and constant monitoring. He also developed arthritis that made the constant travel increasingly painful. By 1954, Ray Kroc was 52 years old. He had been working for nearly 4 decades without achieving anything remotely like success. He had supported his family, but that was the extent of his accomplishment. He was a milkshake machine salesman approaching retirement age with nothing to show for his life except a broken body and a strained marriage. Then one day in July 1954, Ray received an order that changed everything. A restaurant in San Bernardino, California, had ordered 8 multi-mixers. 8. Most restaurants used 1, maybe 2 if they were very busy. An order for 8 machines was unprecedented. It suggested volume that Ray could barely comprehend. His curiosity was immediate and overwhelming. Who were these people? What kind of restaurant needed 8 multi-mixers? Ray could have simply filled the order and taken his commission. He had done exactly that thousands of times before with smaller orders. But something about this one felt different, important, worth investigating personally. Ray booked a flight to Los Angeles. He rented a car and drove to San Bernardino, a working-class city about 60 miles east of Los Angeles in the Inland Empire. The drive took him through orange groves and undeveloped land. San Bernardino was not a destination. It was not a place wealthy people visited. It was hot, dusty, unremarkable in every way. The restaurant sat on East Street, a busy commercial strip. It was small, perhaps 400 square feet of service space. But what Ray saw when he arrived made him stop his car and simply watch. The place was called McDonald's, indicated by enormous golden arches that rose from the roof. The arches were purely decorative, serving no structural purpose. They were there to be seen, to attract attention from passing cars. And they worked. The parking lot was crowded even though it was mid-afternoon. Ray watched for several hours. He observed the operation with the attention of someone who had spent 30 years studying how businesses worked. What he saw violated every principle of successful restaurant operation he understood, and yet it clearly was working at a scale he had never witnessed. There were no waitresses. Customers walked to windows cut into the building's exterior. They placed orders. They received food within seconds, sometimes less than a minute. They ate in their cars or at picnic tables outside. Then they left and new customers arrived immediately. The menu was limited to an absurd degree. Hamburgers, cheeseburgers, French fries, soft drinks, milkshakes. That was it. No steaks, no sandwiches, no breakfast. Just 9 items prepared exactly the same way every time. The prices were astonishingly low. 15 cents for a hamburger, 19 cents for a cheeseburger, 10 cents for fries. No restaurant could make money at those prices. Yet, the volume suggested they were making plenty. Ray finally entered the restaurant and asked to speak to the owners. 2 brothers emerged from the kitchen, Richard and Morris McDonald, Dick and Mac, to everyone who knew them. They were in their 40s, friendly, willing to explain their operation to this curious salesman from Chicago. What the brothers told Ray over the next several hours was a revelation. They had been in the restaurant business since the 1930s. They had operated a conventional drive-in for years, making decent money, but dealing with constant problems. Teenagers hanging around, broken dishes, unreliable staff, complicated menu that required skilled cooks. In 1948, the brothers had done something radical. They closed their successful drive-in and redesigned everything from scratch. They eliminated car hops, dishes, and most menu items. They designed their kitchen like an assembly line, with each worker performing specific tasks in exact sequence. They focused on speed, consistency, and volume rather than variety. The result was revolutionary. The McDonald brothers had created a restaurant that could serve a customer in seconds rather than minutes. That could operate with a small staff because every job was simplified and standardized. That could charge low prices because volume compensated for slim margins. And they had proven the concept worked. Their single restaurant was generating annual revenues of $350,000. Extraordinary for that era. They were wealthy by any reasonable standard, but they seemed content with their one location. They had licensed a few franchises with mixed results, but expansion was not their primary focus. Ray saw immediately what the brothers apparently did not. Or perhaps they saw it but lacked the ambition or energy to pursue it. This concept could be replicated across America. You could build identical restaurants in every city. Standardization was the key. Every McDonald's would serve the same food prepared the same way at the same prices. Customers would know exactly what to expect. The potential was staggering. Ray did the mental math. If one restaurant could generate $350,000, what could 100 restaurants generate? 1,000? The brothers had invented something that could scale infinitely. All it required was someone willing to manage that scaling. Ray proposed a partnership that evening. He would become the exclusive franchising agent for McDonald's. He would recruit franchisees, train them, ensure they followed the system exactly. The brothers would receive 0.5% of all franchise revenue. Ray would keep the rest after expenses. The McDonald brothers were hesitant. They had tried franchising before with disappointing results. Franchisees cut corners. They modified the system. They damaged the McDonald's reputation by not maintaining standards. The brothers were wary of anyone promising rapid expansion, but Ray was persistent. He was not some inexperienced operator. He had been in sales for 30 years. He understood operations. He could enforce standards, and he needed this opportunity with a desperation the brothers could not fully comprehend. Ray Kroc was 52 years old. He had spent 3 decades bouncing from one sales job to another. He had achieved nothing. He had nothing. This was probably his last chance to build something meaningful. He was not going to let it slip away. The brothers finally agreed. Ray would get the franchising rights. He would pay the brothers their percentage. He would maintain the standards that made McDonald's work. A handshake sealed the agreement. Ray flew back to Chicago knowing his life was about to change. What Ray did not fully understand yet was how completely this opportunity would consume him, how it would destroy his marriage, alienate his daughter, damage his health, and ultimately leave him wealthy but isolated. Success was coming, but success would demand everything. The next 3 decades would prove whether the price was worth paying, building the empire that consumed him. Ray Kroc opened his first McDonald's on April 15, 1955 in Des Plaines, Illinois, a Chicago suburb. He was 52 years old and betting everything on a concept that almost no one else believed in. His own wife thought he was insane to give up steady multi-mixer commissions for this uncertainty. The location Ray selected was strategic. Des Plaines was growing rapidly as Chicago's suburbs expanded. The site sat on a busy street with good visibility. Ray could monitor operations personally since it was close to his home. If the concept worked here, it could work anywhere. Ray did not simply copy the McDonald brothers' restaurant. He studied it obsessively. He measured every dimension. He documented every process. He timed every task. Then he replicated it with fanatic attention to detail. The building was identical to the San Bernardino original, red and white tile exterior, golden arches rising from the roof, walk-up windows instead of indoor seating. The kitchen was laid out exactly as the brothers designed it. Every specification was followed precisely. Ray hired teenagers who could be trained to follow procedures exactly. He did not want experienced cooks who thought they knew better. He wanted blank slates who would make hamburgers the McDonald's way and never deviate. The training was intense. Ray personally taught every employee how to make fries, how to dress a burger, how to take orders, how to maintain equipment. Nothing was left to chance or individual judgment. Every task had a procedure. Every procedure had to be followed exactly. The opening day was chaos. Lines of customers extended across the parking lot. The staff was overwhelmed. Ray worked alongside them, making fries, taking orders, doing whatever was necessary to serve customers. The operation nearly collapsed under demand, but Ray learned from that chaos. He refined procedures. He adjusted staffing. He improved training. Within weeks, the Plaines restaurant was operating smoothly, serving hundreds of customers daily with extraordinary speed and consistency. The revenue numbers exceeded Ray's projections. The restaurant was generating profit despite low prices. The volume made up for slim margins exactly as Ray had calculated. This could work, not just in Des Plaines everywhere. Ray began recruiting franchisees immediately. He did not want passive investors. He wanted operators who would commit fully to the McDonald's system, people who understood that consistency mattered more than individual creativity, people who could follow procedures exactly and enforce those procedures on their employees. The franchising agreement Ray developed was innovative and restrictive. Franchisees paid an initial fee plus ongoing royalties based on revenues. But more importantly, franchisees had to follow every specification Ray mandated: the menu, the preparation methods, the quality standards, the building design, everything. Ray was not selling locations. He was selling system membership. You joined McDonald's, you followed the system. You succeeded or failed based on execution, not creativity. This approach was radical for franchising, but it was the only way to ensure consistency across locations. The first franchisees opened restaurants in California and the Midwest. Some were immediately successful. Others struggled. Ray visited every location personally, identifying problems, enforcing standards, terminating agreements with franchisees who could not or would not comply. This hands-on approach required constant travel. Ray was rarely home. He was visiting restaurants, meeting with franchisees, inspecting kitchens, tasting food, timing service. The work was exhausting and never-ending, but Ray drove himself relentlessly because the empire he was building depended on his personal vigilance. Ethel barely saw her husband during these years. Ray would return to Chicago for brief periods, then leave again for weeks at a time. The marriage had been strained before McDonald's. Now it was effectively over, except on paper. They lived separate lives that occasionally intersected. Ray's daughter Marilyn was in her 20s now, married and starting her own family. Her relationship with her father was distant. Ray had missed most of her childhood due to sales travel. Now he was missing her adulthood for the same reason. Marilyn understood that McDonald's mattered more to Ray than she did. The understanding did not make it hurt less. By 1957, Ray had opened 37 McDonald's restaurants. The operation was growing rapidly but generating minimal profit for Ray personally. The franchising agreement with the McDonald brothers was structured in ways that limited his earnings. Ray received only a small percentage after paying the brothers their share. His costs for training, inspection, and quality control consumed most of what remained. Ray was getting rich on paper while remaining cash poor in reality. The McDonald's he was building was valuable, but that value was mostly theoretical until he could somehow restructure the ownership and revenue arrangements. The tension with the McDonald brothers was growing. Ray wanted to expand faster. The brothers were conservative, worried that rapid growth would compromise quality. Ray wanted to modify certain procedures to improve efficiency. The brothers insisted on maintaining their original system exactly, and Ray increasingly resented paying the brothers for work he was doing. They had invented McDonald's, but Ray was building it into something far beyond their single San Bernardino restaurant. He was creating the training systems. He was enforcing the standards. He was solving the problems that franchising created. Why should they receive revenue from his efforts? In 1960, Ray made contact with the McDonald brothers about buying them out completely. The brothers were interested. They were in their 50s now and had health concerns. Selling would give them financial security without the stress of managing expansion they had never particularly wanted. The negotiations were difficult. The brothers wanted $2.7 million, an enormous sum for that era. Ray did not have that kind of money personally. He would need to borrow it, and banks were hesitant to lend millions for a hamburger franchise operation. But Ray was determined. He found investors willing to back the purchase. He negotiated loan terms. He structured the deal so the acquisition would be feasible. On March 2, 1961, Ray finalized the purchase. McDonald's belonged entirely to him. The brothers thought they were getting a fantastic deal. $2.7 million was more money than they could spend in their remaining years. They retired to California, built a new restaurant under a different name, and lived comfortably until their deaths. Ray knew he had stolen the future. Every McDonald's restaurant, every franchise fee, every dollar of profit from now forward belonged to him. The brothers had sold what would become worth billions for less than $3 million. Ray had bet everything on his ability to scale their concept. The bet was about to pay off beyond anyone's imagination. From 1961 forward, McDonald's expansion accelerated dramatically. Ray opened restaurants faster than any franchise operation in American history. He recruited franchisees aggressively. He standardized building designs so construction could happen quickly. He developed supply systems to ensure consistent ingredients across locations. The company went public in 1965. Ray's personal wealth immediately jumped to tens of millions as McDonald's stock began trading. The milkshake machine salesman who had struggled for decades was suddenly one of the wealthiest men in America. But the wealth came at profound costs that were becoming impossible to ignore. His marriage to Ethel had been dead for years. His relationship with Marilyn was formal and distant. His health was deteriorating under teen. The stress of constant work and travel. The diabetes was worsening. The arthritis was becoming debilitating. And Ray was miserable despite his success. The work consumed him, but it never satisfied him. Every restaurant that opened demanded 10 more. Every franchise agreement signed created problems that required his attention. Every system implemented revealed weaknesses that needed fixing. Ray could not stop, could not slow down, could not delegate. McDonald's was his identity, his purpose, his reason for existing. Without it, who was he? A wealthy old man who had destroyed his marriage and alienated his daughter while building an empire of hamburgers. The thought was unbearable. So Ray kept working, kept traveling, kept building, kept sacrificing everything for a company that could never love him back or acknowledge his sacrifices or provide what he actually needed, which was connection and meaning beyond business success. The mansion he would eventually build in La Jolla was supposed to be where this pattern ended, where Ray could finally stop working and start living, where success could finally be enjoyed rather than endlessly pursued. It did not work out that way. The mansion became another stage for the same patterns, another space where Ray's inability to separate himself from McDonald's would destroy any chance of peace or satisfaction. But before we can understand the mansion, we need to understand the personal destruction that preceded it, the marriages that failed, the relationships that died, the choices that left Ray wealthy but alone, the women who could not compete with hamburgers. In 1957, during one of his many trips to St. Paul, Minnesota to inspect McDonald's franchises, Ray Kroc met a woman who would change his personal life as dramatically as the McDonald brothers had changed his professional life. Her name was Joan Mansfield Smith. Joan was married to Raleigh Smith, who operated a McDonald's franchise in the St. Paul area. Raleigh was one of Ray's more successful franchisees, running a clean operation that followed every McDonald's standard. When Ray visited the area, he often stopped by the Smiths' restaurant and occasionally accepted dinner invitations to their home. Joan was everything Ethel was not. Blonde, glamorous, socially sophisticated. She dressed fashionably, she understood business and could discuss franchise operations knowledgeably. She was interested in Ray's vision for McDonald's in ways Ethel had never been. And she was attracted to Ray's success and ambition in ways that were intoxicating after decades of a marriage defined by Ethel's quiet disappointment. The affair began quickly, though exactly when is disputed in different accounts. What is not disputed is that by 1958, Ray and Joan were involved romantically while both were still married to other people. Ray made little effort to hide it. He brought Joan to business functions. He traveled with her openly when circumstances permitted. When questioned by friends about the impropriety, Ray's response was characteristically blunt. He had earned his success through decades of work. He was building McDonald's into something extraordinary. He was finally making real money after a lifetime of struggle. He deserved to be happy. And Ethel made him miserable in ways Joan did not. The logic was simple, selfish, and completely consistent with how Ray approached everything in his life. McDonald's mattered more than social convention. His satisfaction mattered more than other people's judgment. The future he was building mattered more than the past he was abandoning. Ethel knew about the affair, of course. It was impossible not to know when Ray was barely pretending to hide it. She confronted him. He did not deny it. Their marriage had been dead for years, he told her. They had stayed together from habit and inertia. Why continue a charade when both of them were miserable? Ethel's response revealed the gulf between them. She did not want a divorce. Despite everything, despite Ray's absence and emotional distance and infidelity, she wanted their marriage to continue. She had invested 40 years. She had raised their daughter. She had supported Ray through decades when support meant believing in him when nothing in his track record justified belief. Ray wanted none of that history to matter. He wanted to move forward unencumbered by obligation to someone who represented everything he was trying to leave behind. Ethel was his past, Joan was his future, and Ray always prioritized future over past. The divorce proceedings began in 1961. Ethel fought initially, hoping Ray would change his mind. He did not. His lawyers pushed for a settlement that would minimize what Ethel received. They argued that most of Ray's wealth was tied up in McDonald's stock that was not yet liquid. They pointed out that the company's future value was speculative. Ethel's lawyers argued that she was entitled to half of everything Ray had accumulated during their marriage, that she had supported him for decades, sacrificing her own potential to raise their daughter and maintain their home while Ray built his career, that her contributions, while not financial, were essential to everything Ray had achieved. The settlement that was finally reached gave Ethel a fraction of what she would have received in an equal split. She got some McDonald's stock, a modest cash payment, and ongoing support that was substantial by working-class standards, but nothing approaching the hundreds of millions Ray's empire would eventually be worth. The divorce was finalized in 1961. After nearly 40 years of marriage, Ray walked away. Ethel was in her late 50s, divorced, without a career or independent identity, facing a future alone. She never recovered from the betrayal. Friends from that era report that Ethel became increasingly depressed and withdrawn. She moved to a small apartment. She lived on the divorce settlement. She saw her daughter Marilyn and grandchildren regularly, but otherwise isolated herself from the world. Ethel died in 1965, just 4 years after the divorce. She was 61 years old. The official cause of death was heart failure, but those who knew her believed she had simply given up. The man she had believed in when no one else did had discarded her the moment success arrived. What was left to live for? Ray did not attend Ethel's funeral. He was traveling on McDonald's business, or claimed to be. The message to Marilyn was clear. Her mother's death was inconvenient timing, but McDonald's could not stop for personal matters. Marilyn never fully forgave her father. She maintained contact because he was her father, and because his wealth would eventually benefit her children. But the warmth was gone. She had watched him abandon her mother and felt complicit by not defending Ethel more forcefully. The relationship for the rest of Ray's life was cordial but cold. Ray married Joan Mansfield Smith in 1963, after her divorce from Raleigh was finalized. The marriage seemed to offer everything Ray wanted. Joan was glamorous, sophisticated, interested in business. She hosted dinners for McDonald's executives with grace. She traveled with Ray without complaining. She presented herself as the perfect corporate wife. But Joan brought complications Ray had not fully anticipated. She was expensive. Her tastes ran toward luxury that even Ray's growing fortune strained to accommodate. She wanted designer clothes, expensive jewelry, properties in multiple locations. She wanted the lifestyle that successful executive wives were supposed to maintain. More problematically, Joan wanted Ray's time and attention. She had left her husband partly because Ray's success was attractive. But that success required constant work. Ray was still traveling constantly, still micromanaging McDonald's operations, still unable to delegate or trust others to maintain his standards. Joan began to resent Ray's absence as much as Ethel had. The difference was that Joan was less willing to accept it quietly. She complained. She demanded Ray cut back on travel. She threatened to leave if he did not prioritize their marriage more seriously. Ray's response was to work more. When Joan complained about his absence, he traveled more frequently. When she demanded attention, he stayed at the office later. The pattern was perverse but consistent with everything in Ray's personality. Demands made him defiant. Restrictions made him rebel. Even demands from someone he supposedly loved. The marriage lasted 17 years, from 1963 to 1969. Those years saw McDonald's grow from hundreds of restaurants to thousands. They saw Ray's wealth climb from millions to hundreds of millions. They saw the Golden Arches become one of the most recognized symbols on Earth, but the marriage was hollow almost from the beginning. Ray and Joan appeared together at required functions. They maintained a house together, though increasingly they occupied it. At different times, they presented a united front publicly while living essentially separate lives privately. Joan began traveling independently, pursuing her own social calendar. She maintained friendships that did not include Ray. She filled her time with activities that did not require his participation. The marriage became a business arrangement that was mutually beneficial but emotionally bankrupt. By 1968, Ray was openly involved with another woman. Her name was Joan Beverly Kroc, though everyone called her Beverly to distinguish her from Ray's wife Joan. The confusion of names was appropriate. Ray was replacing one Joan with another, seeking in a third marriage what he had failed to find in the first two. Beverly was different from both Ethel and Joan Mansfield. She had worked as a roller skating rink organist when Ray first met her in 1957, the same year he met Joan Mansfield. The timing was not coincidental. Ray had been simultaneously pursuing two different women while still married to Ethel, apparently unable to commit to any single relationship fully. But Beverly had stayed in Ray's mind in ways Joan Mansfield ultimately did not. There was something authentic about Beverly that Joan lacked. She was warm where Joan was polished. She was genuinely interested in Ray as a person rather than Ray as a successful businessman. She made him laugh in ways he had not laughed in decades. Ray divorced Joan Mansfield in 1969. The settlement was substantially more expensive than the divorce from Ethel. Joan had signed a prenuptial agreement, but it still provided her with millions in cash and assets. She walked away wealthy, angry, and convinced she had wasted 6 years on a man incapable of prioritizing anything except hamburgers. Ray married Beverly in 1969. He was 66 years old. This was his third marriage. He had destroyed 2 families to reach this point, and he was finally, genuinely convinced he had found the relationship that would make him happy. Beverly was different. She loved Ray in ways that seemed disconnected from his wealth or success. She was comfortable with his obsessive work habits without being martyred by them. She enjoyed the lifestyle Ray's money provided but did not demand it. She made Ray feel understood in ways no one else ever had. But by the time Ray married Beverly, fundamental patterns had been established that could not be easily changed. He was 66 years old. He had spent 45 years prioritizing work over relationships. He had trained himself to measure worth through business achievement. He could not suddenly become a different person just because he had finally found genuine love. And his health was failing. The diabetes that had been manageable in his 50s was becoming serious in his 60s. The arthritis that had been painful was becoming debilitating. He had survived a minor stroke in 1976 that left him weakened. The body that had sustained decades of punishing work was breaking down. Beverly became less a wife than a caretaker. She managed Ray's medications, monitored his diet, arranged his medical care. She loved him genuinely, but much of their marriage involved managing his decline rather than enjoying their time together. Ray had found happiness too late. He had spent 3 marriages searching for what Beverly provided. By the time he found it, he was too old and too sick to fully enjoy it. This was the man who would build the La Jolla mansion, wealthy beyond measure, successful beyond imagination, married to a woman who genuinely loved him, and profoundly damaged by decades of prioritizing McDonald's over everything else. The mansion would be built during these years with Beverly. It would be designed to be their sanctuary, their reward for everything Ray had achieved. It would represent the life Ray believed he had finally earned. It would not work out that way. Planning the California sanctuary that became a prison. By 1970, Ray Kroc had decided California was where he wanted to spend his remaining years. The weather was better for his arthritis and diabetes than Chicago's harsh winters. McDonald's had substantial West Coast operations that required attention. And Beverly loved California in ways she had never loved the Midwest. Ray began looking at properties in Southern California's most exclusive coastal communities. Malibu was too remote and too associated with Hollywood. Beverly Hills was too urban and too status-conscious. Newport Beach was too conservative and too much like the Midwest, transplanted. La Jolla checked every box. The small community north of San Diego was sophisticated without being showy. The ocean views were spectacular. The climate was nearly perfect year-round. Property values were climbing, but still reasonable compared to Los Angeles locations. And La Jolla offered something Ray particularly valued: privacy. The community was small enough that locals protected each other from outside attention. Wealthy residents could live without constant scrutiny. Ray could build an estate without every McDonald's franchisee and executive expecting invitations. Ray purchased a large parcel on a hillside overlooking the Pacific. The site was perfect. High enough for unobstructed views, large enough for substantial grounds, positioned so neighbors were distant enough to not matter. This would be Ray's refuge from the world he had spent decades building. He interviewed multiple architectural firms before selecting Burdick and McGee, a San Diego practice known for contemporary residential design. Ray did not want a traditional mansion. He wanted something modern that embraced its California location: clean lines, open spaces, floor-to-ceiling glass. The house should feel like it belonged on this hillside overlooking this ocean. The architects listened to Ray's requirements and translated them into preliminary designs. The house would be approximately 16,000 square feet. Not the largest estate in La Jolla, but substantial. 6 bedrooms because Beverly wanted space for family and guests. 8 bathrooms because Ray believed luxury required that kind of excess. Multiple entertaining areas because Ray still envisioned hosting dinners for franchisees and executives. But the real focus was the view. Every major room would have windows facing the ocean. The living areas would open onto terraces where you could step outside and feel the Pacific breeze. The master suite would have private balconies. The entire house was oriented toward that endless horizon. Ray approved the designs with his characteristic attention to detail and impatience with delay. He wanted the finest materials available: marble from Italy for floors, teak from Indonesia for outdoor spaces, glass from Germany for the enormous windows. Every specification was the best money could buy because Ray had spent decades unable to afford the best and now refused to accept anything less. Beverly participated in the interior design, though Ray's opinions dominated even in spaces that would primarily be hers. Ray had never learned to share control. Even in marriage, even with someone he loved, he needed to make final decisions. Beverly adapted by choosing battles carefully, accepting Ray's preferences on matters that did not affect daily livability. Construction began in 1970 and would take nearly 3 years. The site presented challenges immediately. The hillside required extensive grading and retaining walls. The soil composition demanded deep foundations to ensure stability. The proximity to the ocean meant every material had to resist salt air corrosion. Ray visited the construction site obsessively despite his declining health. He reviewed progress weekly. He inspected work personally. He demanded corrections when anything failed to meet his standards. The general contractor quickly learned that Ray Kroc would accept nothing less than perfection regardless of cost overruns or schedule delays. The budget was essentially unlimited. Ray told the architects and contractors to build it correctly and the cost would follow. Initial estimates suggested $5 million total. Final accounting exceeded $8 million, equivalent to well over $40 million today. Materials alone cost millions: the marble floors, the custom windows, the mechanical systems designed to maintain perfect temperature and humidity despite the coastal location. But money was not the point. Ray had more money than he could spend in his remaining years. This house was about creating something permanent, a place where he could finally enjoy what he had built, where Beverly could entertain without the stress of Ray's constant travel, where they could live the life his success had supposedly earned. The grounds received equal attention. Landscape architects designed gardens that would thrive in La Jolla's Mediterranean climate: palm trees, succulents, flowering plants that required minimal water. Walking paths wound through the plantings, offering different views of the ocean and the house itself. A pool was positioned to seem to flow into the Pacific beyond, creating the illusion of infinite water. By 1973, the house was substantially complete. The exteriors were finished, the grounds were planted, the interiors were being furnished with pieces Beverly selected with input from designers. Everything was coming together exactly as planned. Ray and Beverly moved into the La Jolla estate in late 1973. Ray was 71 years old. He had spent 5 decades building McDonald's into a global empire. Now he would finally have time to enjoy what that sacrifice had purchased. Except Ray could not stop working, could not accept that McDonald's no longer needed his constant attention, could not admit that the company had grown beyond any single person's ability to control it. The mansion that was supposed to free him from work became the place where he confronted his own obsolescence. And that confrontation would define his final decade in ways that made the La Jolla estate less a sanctuary than a stage for tragedy. The house itself was perfect. The problem was the man living in it, the slow death of relevance. The first years at the La Jolla mansion should have been glorious. Ray was in his early 70s, still relatively healthy, wealthier than he had ever imagined possible. Beverly was devoted and tireless in her efforts to make their life together meaningful. The house provided every comfort. The location offered perfect weather and spectacular views. But Ray could not settle, could not relax, could not accept retirement even though he was supposedly retired, because the truth was that Ray Kroc did not know how to be anything except the man building McDonald's. Without that identity, he was lost. Ray had maintained an office at McDonald's headquarters in Oak Brook, Illinois, even after moving to California. He still held the title of senior chairman. He attended board meetings when his health permitted. He reviewed financial reports religiously. He made suggestions about operations that were increasingly ignored by executives who had never worked directly with him. The younger generation of McDonald's leadership respected Ray's legacy, but did not defer to his judgment the way earlier executives had. Ray had built the company through force of personality and micromanagement, but McDonald's had evolved into a professionally managed corporation with systems and processes that did not require any single individual's constant attention. This evolution was exactly what Ray had always wanted. He had spent decades creating standardization so McDonald's could operate without him personally visiting every restaurant. He had developed training programs so franchisees could succeed by following the system rather than relying on his guidance. He had built an organization that could scale infinitely. But now that the organization had scaled beyond him, Ray felt betrayed by his own success. He had made himself unnecessary. The company he built no longer needed him. And without being needed by McDonald's, Ray did not know who he was. He tried asserting authority from La Jolla. He would call headquarters demanding explanations for decisions he learned about through board reports. He criticized new menu items that violated his principles about simplicity. He complained about restaurants that did not meet his standards for cleanliness and speed. The responses from Oak Brook were polite but firm. Ray's legacy was secure. Everyone appreciated his vision, but McDonald's was a global corporation now, operating in dozens of countries, serving millions of customers daily. Professional management was required. Systems and data drove decisions. Ray's instincts, while historically valuable, were not sufficient for the scale of modern operations. Each polite dismissal wounded Ray deeply. He had built this, every restaurant, every system, every standard. How dare these executives, most of whom had joined McDonald's long after its founding, tell him his input was not needed? Beverly watched this deterioration with growing alarm. She tried distracting Ray with activities that did not involve McDonald's. She suggested travel. She encouraged hobbies. She invited friends to visit. She tried creating a life for Ray beyond the company that had consumed him for 2 decades. None of it worked. Ray would participate in social events Beverly organized, but his mind was elsewhere. He would travel, but would spend the trip making calls to Oakbrook. He could not separate himself from McDonald's even when physically distant. The company was his identity in ways Beverly could not compete with or replace. Ray's health was declining in parallel with his relevance. The diabetes required constant management. His blood sugar would spike or crash unpredictably. The medications had side effects that made him nauseated or dizzy. Managing the disease consumed hours each day. The arthritis that had been painful in his 60s became debilitating in his 70s. Ray needed assistance walking. His hands were so stiff that simple tasks like buttoning shirts or signing documents required help. The physical capabilities that had sustained decades of work travel were failing. In 1976, Ray suffered a stroke, not severe enough to kill him or leave him completely incapacitated, but serious enough to weaken him significantly. His speech was slurred temporarily. His balance was affected. The recovery took months and was never complete. Beverly became Ray's primary caretaker. She managed his medications, monitored his blood sugar, helped him move through the house. Nurses visited daily to assist with medical needs. The mansion that was supposed to be their sanctuary became essentially a medical facility. But even illness could not separate Ray from McDonald's. He installed multiple phone lines in his office. He reviewed reports from bed when he was too weak to sit at a desk. He insisted on attending board meetings even when travel meant risking his health. The executives at Oakbrook began to see Ray as a problem rather than an asset. His insistence on being consulted slowed decision-making. His criticism of new initiatives created doubt among younger managers. His health made him unreliable for public appearances that would have benefited from his presence. Quietly, carefully, McDonald's leadership began planning for a future without Ray Kroc. Succession had already happened operationally. Now they needed to manage the symbolic transition. How do you move beyond a founder who is still alive but no longer relevant? Ray sensed this shift, and it devastated him. He had spent his entire adult life being unnecessary, first as a struggling salesman, then as a franchising agent building someone else's concept. When he finally achieved relevance by owning McDonald's completely, it had felt like vindication of all those years of insignificance. Now he was sliding back into irrelevance. Except this time he had no opportunity to build his way back to mattering. He was old, sick, and physically unable to do the work that had defined him. All he could do was watch from La Jolla as McDonald's continued succeeding without him. The mansion became the stage for this slow-motion tragedy. Beverly tried maintaining normalcy. She created routines. She hosted dinners when Ray felt well enough. She filled the house with visitors who might distract or comfort him, but Ray was increasingly withdrawn. He would spend days in his office making calls that accomplished nothing. He would read reports that frustrated him because they documented decisions made without his input. He would sit on the terrace overlooking the Pacific, staring at views he did not see, thinking about what he had sacrificed to get here. His relationship with his daughter Marilyn remained strained. She visited occasionally with her children, Ray's grandchildren, but the visits were formal and uncomfortable. Marilyn had never forgiven Ray for abandoning her mother. Ray had never apologized because he did not believe he had done anything wrong. The grandchildren loved their grandfather's wealth but barely knew him as a person. Ray was the man who built McDonald's, the rich grandfather who lived in the mansion by the ocean. Not someone they felt emotionally connected to or understood beyond his public identity. By 1980, Ray's life had contracted to the mansion, his office within it, and the medical appointments that dominated his calendar. He rarely left La Jolla. He saw few people beyond Beverly and medical staff. McDonald's continued growing globally, opening thousands of new restaurants. But Ray's connection to that growth was increasingly theoretical. He was wealthy beyond imagination. He was famous worldwide. His name was associated with one of the most successful businesses in human history. And he was profoundly, irreparably alone in ways that all the money and all the success could not fix. The mansion that was supposed to celebrate his achievements instead highlighted their emptiness. Every room was a reminder of what he had built. Every empty chair was evidence of relationships sacrificed along the way. The house was perfect. Ray's life inside it was unbearable. The final years, 1981 to 1984, would be a slow decline toward the inevitable. Ray would fight to maintain relevance. He would fail. He would confront the reality that business success and life satisfaction were completely different things, and he would die in his beautiful mansion, surrounded by luxury, having achieved everything except what actually mattered, the final confrontation with mortality and meaning. By 1981, Ray Kroc was fighting multiple enemies: his failing health, his declining relevance at McDonald's, his strained relationships with family, and his growing realization that the life he had built was not the life he actually wanted. The diabetes was winning. Despite careful management, Ray's blood sugar was increasingly unstable. The medications required constant adjustment. His energy was unpredictable. Some days he could work from his office for hours. Other days he could barely get out of bed. The arthritis had progressed to the point where movement was painful and difficult. Ray needed assistance walking even short distances. His hands trembled constantly. Simple tasks required help from Beverly or nursing staff. The physical independence that had sustained his decades of travel and work was completely gone. But Ray's mind remained sharp, and that sharpness made everything worse. He understood clearly what was happening. His body was failing. His company was moving beyond him. His legacy was secure, but his present was empty. He could see all of this with painful clarity and could do nothing to change it. Beverly tried everything. She created structure to Ray's days, morning routines that gave purpose, afternoon activities that provided distraction, evening social time when Ray felt well enough for visitors. She was trying to build a life for Ray beyond McDonald's, but Ray had never learned to value anything except work. The mansion itself became a character in this tragedy. The house was perfect in every detail. The ocean views were as spectacular as when Ray first saw the property. The spaces were elegant and comfortable. The grounds were beautifully maintained. Everything worked exactly as designed, but the perfection was oppressive. The mansion was too large for two people, even with household staff. Rooms that Ray had envisioned filling with guests and business associates sat empty. The entertaining spaces designed for large gatherings went unused. The house meant to celebrate success instead highlighted its hollowness. Ray would walk through rooms that served no purpose, past furniture no one sat in, looking at art he barely noticed. Every space reminded him of what he had imagined when building this place, and how completely reality had failed to match those imaginings. His office became his refuge and his prison. He spent hours there daily, maintaining the fiction that he was still working, still relevant, still necessary to McDonald's operations. He read reports, he made calls to headquarters, he reviewed financial statements. He performed the rituals of business leadership even though everyone understood the performance was empty. The calls to Oakbrook became increasingly painful. Executives took them out of respect for Ray's legacy, not because they valued his input. They listened politely to his suggestions. They thanked him for his continued interest. Then they did exactly what they had planned before his call. Ray could hear the condescension even when speakers tried to hide it. The careful phrasing, the gentle redirections, the patient explanations of why his ideas, while interesting, were not practical for modern operations. He was being managed like a difficult stakeholder rather than consulted as the founder. Each interaction eroded Ray's sense of self a bit more. If McDonald's did not need him, who was he? A wealthy old man dying in a mansion he barely enjoyed. The thought was devastating. Beverly suggested philanthropic work. Ray could give away some of his fortune to causes he cared about. Establish scholarships, fund medical research, build something meaningful beyond hamburgers. Many wealthy men found purpose through philanthropy in their final years. Ray donated millions to various causes. Hospitals received substantial gifts. Diabetes research was funded. Medical facilities in San Diego were built with Kroc money. The donations were genuine and generous. But philanthropy did not fill the void. Ray was not giving money because he had found new purpose. He was giving because he had nothing else to do with wealth he could not take with him. The donations felt like admissions of defeat rather than expressions of values. His relationship with Marilyn remained distant. She called regularly out of duty. She visited when expected. But the warmth that should exist between father and daughter was absent. Too much damage had accumulated over decades. Ray's abandonment of her mother, his prioritization of McDonald's over family, his inability or unwillingness to apologize for any of it. Marilyn's children, Ray's grandchildren, visited occasionally. Ray enjoyed these visits in the abstract, but he did not know how to connect with children. He had missed most of Marilyn's childhood. He had no practice being a grandfather. The interactions were stilted and brief. In 1983, Ray's health deteriorated sharply. Another stroke, more serious than the one in 1976. His speech was affected. His mobility was further reduced. The recovery was slow and incomplete. The doctors were increasingly frank about prognosis. Ray's body was shutting down. How long he had remaining was uncertain, but the trajectory was clear. Beverly dedicated herself entirely to Ray's care during this final year. She managed his medical team. She monitored his condition constantly. She was with him almost every moment, providing comfort and support that Ray had not earned but desperately needed. Ray's final months were a mixture of physical decline and mental clarity that made the decline more difficult. He knew he was dying. He understood his time was limited, but his mind remained alert enough to contemplate what his life had meant. He had built McDonald's into a global phenomenon. Billions of people had eaten food from restaurants bearing his standards. Millions of people had worked for McDonald's franchises. Thousands of franchisees had built wealth following his system. The impact was undeniable and would outlast him by centuries. But what did that matter if he died essentially alone? If his daughter visited from duty rather than love? If his grandchildren barely knew him? If the wife who truly loved him had found him too late in his life to change patterns established over decades? Ray Kroc had won at business and lost at life. The mansion surrounding him was proof of both. Every detail announced his success. Every empty space highlighted his failure. On January 14, 1984, Ray Kroc died at the La Jolla mansion. He was 81 years old. Beverly was with him at the end. The official cause of death was heart failure, though really it was the accumulated damage of 81 years of living, the last 30 of which had been consumed entirely by building McDonald's. The news spread quickly. McDonald's restaurants around the world lowered their flags to half-staff. The corporation issued statements celebrating Ray's vision and legacy. News media covered his death extensively, focusing on his extraordinary business achievements and his transformation of American dining. But within the mansion, the death was quieter and more personal. Beverly grieved for the complicated man she had loved. The household staff who had cared for Ray mourned in their own way. And the house itself stood silent, its purpose suddenly unclear now that the man who built it was gone. Ray's funeral was well attended by McDonald's executives, franchisees, and business associates. But the mourning felt performative. These were people who respected Ray's achievements, not people who knew him intimately or would miss his personal presence. Marilyn attended with her family. She grieved, but her grief was complicated by decades of resentment and disappointment. She mourned the father she wished she'd had rather than the father who had actually raised or failed to raise her. The will Ray left distributed his fortune according to carefully structured plans. Most of his wealth, primarily McDonald's stock worth hundreds of millions, would eventually fund charitable work through foundations he and Beverly had established. Beverly would be financially secure for life. Marilyn received provisions, but not the vast inheritance some expected. The La Jolla mansion went to Beverly. She could live there as long as she wanted. After her death, or if she chose to sell earlier, the proceeds would add to the foundation's endowment. Beverly stayed in the house for several years after Ray's death, but the mansion felt wrong without him despite all the difficulties his presence had created. The spaces designed for a couple seemed too large for one person. The rooms filled with memories, both good and painful, made moving forward difficult. In 1988, Beverly sold the La Jolla estate for approximately $15 million. The buyer was a real estate developer who saw the property's potential for resale or redevelopment. The mansion's association with Ray Kroc was mentioned but not emphasized. The value was in the land, location, and quality of construction, not the history. Beverly moved to a smaller property in Rancho Santa Fe, another exclusive San Diego area community. She would live another 15 years until 2003, spending those years distributing the fortune Ray had left. She gave away billions, literally billions, to causes ranging from AIDS research to national public radio to nuclear disarmament to animal welfare. The scale of Beverly's philanthropy was extraordinary. She gave $1.5 billion to the Salvation Army, one of the largest single charitable donations in American history. She funded hospice care, homeless shelters, public broadcasting, medical research. She gave away Ray's fortune faster and more generously than he had ever imagined. This was Beverly's final gift to Ray. She used the money he had accumulated to create the legacy of generosity he had never quite achieved in life. The Kroc name became associated with massive philanthropy rather than just hamburgers. Beverly rewrote Ray's story through giving. But the mansion itself became just another luxury property in La Jolla's competitive real estate market. It passed through several owners over the following decades. Each made modifications according to their tastes. The interiors were updated repeatedly. The grounds were redesigned. The pool was renovated and expanded. The house that Ray built was gradually transformed by people who had no connection to him or his story. The office where he had spent hours trying to maintain relevance became a different room serving different purposes. The master suite where he had died was completely remodeled. The spaces that had witnessed his final years were erased by renovation and time. Today, the mansion still stands on its hillside overlooking the Pacific. Current property records value it at over $25 million. The location remains among the most desirable in Southern California. The ocean views are as spectacular as ever. Wealthy buyers compete for properties like this, but almost nothing remains that connects the house to Ray Kroc. The current owners may not even know the property's history. The real estate listings mention the square footage, the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, the ocean views, the quality of construction. They do not mention the tragedy that unfolded within those walls. The McDonald's corporation that Ray built continues thriving. The company operates nearly 40,000 restaurants in over 100 countries. It serves approximately 70 million customers daily. The golden arches are among the most recognized symbols on Earth. Ray's vision of fast, consistent, affordable food has shaped how the entire world eats. His business legacy is secure. His personal legacy is more complicated. Ray Kroc proved that extraordinary success is possible even when it comes late in life. He built a global empire in his 50s and 60s when most people are thinking about retirement. He demonstrated that persistence and vision can overcome repeated failure. He showed that American capitalism could scale a simple concept to dimensions no one thought possible. But he also proved that business success does not guarantee life satisfaction, that wealth cannot purchase the relationships you neglected while accumulating it, that empires built at the cost of everything else leave their builders isolated within mansions that feel more like prisons than palaces. The La Jolla estate was supposed to be Ray's reward, the place where he could finally enjoy what he had achieved. Instead, it became the stage for his final confrontation with the emptiness of pure achievement. The house was perfect. The views were spectacular. The wealth was beyond imagination. And none of it mattered because Ray had sacrificed everything that actually creates meaning. Beverly understood this in ways Ray never fully did. That is why she gave away his fortune so aggressively after his death. She was trying to create meaning retroactively, to use Ray's wealth in ways that might redeem the costs of accumulating it. The tragedy of Ray Kroc's mansion is not that it was poorly designed or badly located. The tragedy is that it represented everything Ray thought he wanted and nothing he actually needed. He built it believing success would finally be enough. He died there having learned that success, no matter how extraordinary, is never enough if achieved at the cost of human connection. The mansion stands today as a monument to this lesson. Beautiful, valuable, sought after by wealthy buyers who see only real estate, not history. But for those who know the story, the house carries a warning that no architectural perfection can erase. Be careful what you sacrifice for success. The price may seem acceptable when you are young and ambitious and convinced that achievement will bring satisfaction. But the bill comes due eventually, and you may discover that you have built a perfect mansion on a foundation of loss that no amount of luxury can fill. Ray Kroc changed how the world eats. He built an empire that will outlast him by centuries. He accumulated wealth beyond most people's ability to comprehend, and he died essentially alone in a beautiful house overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by everything money could buy except the things that actually matter. That is the tragic story of Ray Kroc's California estate. Not a story of architectural achievement or real estate success. A story of human cost, of dreams realized and life lost, of winning everything except what makes winning worthwhile. The mansion remembers even if we forget. Every room whispers the same warning to anyone willing to listen. Success is not enough. Achievement is not satisfaction. And the most expensive prison is one you build yourself while calling it a dream.